And so lastly, we have Deimos. Now, funnily enough, Deimos is actually the first boss description I'm recording for you all here because he's the one I spent the most time on, and he was the most fresh one in my mind as he comes at the end of the stack. Deimos is unquestionably the hardest boss of all of them in the wing, much harder even still than, say, Samurog was, but with the right contingencies and roles set up for people in place, I think that you can quite consistently kill this dude, and it's a really fun fight, mostly for the lore and the theming of the area, but I think that the fight itself as well is pretty strong mechanically too, though it's a very punishing one. I'll tell you what the most punishing attack is in just a second. Two things to know about this fight. Toughness tanking returns. I was kind of getting the impression throughout the wing that maybe toughness tanking wasn't going to be a thing anymore, that maybe the devs didn't like this kind of weird, almost arbitrary method of introducing some kind of aggro mechanic, or maybe they'd change it up. I might have even been expecting vitality tanking or something in one of these raids at some point, but no, toughness tanking does return. You're probably going to want to put that on your Chronomancer and you know, make sure that you have that assigned well, and also people who have the second to most toughness and the third to most, just in case your tank goes down and then all hell breaks loose. You need to be sure of what's happening. The other thing about this fight is it seems to work really well if you tackle it with a lot of Condi, which is a funny thing because Condi seemed to be a big theme of the whole wing, especially the first time I went through it and we had those Samurog bugs. Well, Condi, definitely, when my group finally started running a lot more, we got the kill a lot quicker. I don't know whether this is the developers deliberately saying, hey, Deimos takes more damage to Condis, or whether it's just the nature of the way that the phases and things work, but Condi did seem very strong. It's weird, though, because the power damage doesn't seem lower, so I don't know whether it's because this boss has very high toughness. In fact, the numbers on this boss seem really high, especially if you run impact and stuff, which I'll talk about in just a second. Yeah, it's up to you guys to decide what you do there, but that's what we eventually had. Let's talk about the fight itself, shall we? Right. So, the opening of the fight involves a shackled prisoner, a man with a health bar who is imprisoned on the center of the platform, and it's your job to keep him alive. What he is at risk by are ghosts, which are spawning on the outside of the circle and walking into him. Lots of ghosts. There are lots of small ones called greed, and when they get on him, I think they do like 1% of his health, and you have to kill the greeds before they get there. But then more importantly, there are some big ghosts, some big spirits. These are called pride, and pride does tons of damage. Pride does like 25% of his health straight away. Pride can't be like blown out or knocked down or whatever, but you can use things like immobilize, cripples, chills. It's very similar to a previous raid boss in the first wing of the first raid. And so you really need to make sure that these prides don't get in on the prisoner. So your initial objective is just to keep this alive. And then very quickly, what you're going to notice is the Eye of Janthir present here once again, as it was in all of the fights. The Eye of Janthir is going to choose a person. And what it's going to do when it chooses someone is it's going to teleport that player elsewhere. They're going to have a green circle around them, and the funny thing is, any players on your team who wish to stand with the person that the Eye of Janthir has chosen, they will get teleported too. So once again, just like with Samurog, it's like one of your players has kind of a mobile AoE, and they're going to stand somewhere, and you can choose, do you want to leave with the person that the Eye of Janthir has chosen? And the question is, where did the Eye of Janthir choose you to go? Well, it's pretty crazy. I guess you'll have to wait for the lore video, or maybe if it's already out, watch the lore video for us to do some speculation here. But we end up basically in the Elseworld, the Upside Down, another realm. We're on the same boss platform, but now everything's crazy. It's like a hell version. It's amazing. And here, you'll notice no longer is it a shackled prisoner man that is tied up, but instead a horrendous-looking demon called Deimos. Deimos is the actual boss. While you're in the Elseworld, you can actually just break his chains, Deimos's chains, and release this demon upon the world. And as you break these chains, you break the chains on the regular version of the world too. And so when each of these 4 chains breaks, everybody who's in the Elseworld gets teleported back, and then the Eye of Janthir will choose someone again, and then you go up, and then you break a chain, and then you go down, and then you go up, and you break a chain, and you go down, and you go up. And so this is the start of the fight. So you've got to kind of split people to defend the prisoner below, while everyone else is in this crazy dimension trying to shatter the chains. So the enraged timer on this fight is almost a non-mechanic. And the reason I think it's almost a non-mechanic is because this first part of the fight, I believe ArenaNet were probably envisioning people to spend a lot longer on. See, in truth, if you just send some condition damage players up there, or you're very careful, you can load all 4 of the chains up with Condi and break them all up at once. So instead of having to go up, down, up, down, up, down, up, down, and properly defend the prisoner below, the start of the fight, most groups, you'll just nuke all 4 chains, kill all 4 chains at once, or in 2 burns, if you will, and then that's it, you're done. And you move into the rest of the fight. And that takes a huge amount of time off of what the enrage timer would otherwise maybe threaten you with. And so enrage really isn't a thing. Enrage is very rarely a thing in raids, guys. For the amount of discussion that goes on with enrage, it's very, very rarely a thing. And very rarely, even further than that, do ArenaNet add proper hard enrages. But anyway, so once you've shattered all of these, the ghosts stop coming. They will return later. We'll get to that. But the ghosts stop coming, and you're essentially now in a totally different fight. Deimos has been freed at the same time as the prisoner, who now, if you haven't seen the spoiler video, just a warning, I'm going to be spoiling it now. The prisoner is none other than Saul D'Alessio. I'll try not to geek out about that here. But Saul D'Alessio will now fight with you against Deimos. Saul has a lot of very powerful abilities. Let's just get these out of the way. The challenge mode version of this encounter, as far as I understand, is actually to beat it without Saul, which is a fairly big difference. Saul does a lot of stuff. He drops these epic banners that give ridiculous regen healing. He casts Unnatural Signet on the boss. All of his skills are throwbacks to skills you could use while playing as Saul in Guild Wars 1 in the bonus mission pack, by the way. He uses Unnatural Signet on the boss, which gives everyone 200% more damage to Deimos, which is mental. He is the only person in the group who is capable of stunning Deimos. He does a lot of stuff. And so Saul will fight with you, and you can kind of ignore his presence, but pay attention to when he pops, say, Unnatural Signet to get your big burns off, if that's actually possible. And yeah, that's now a component of the fight, but you're fighting against Deimos, and the real battle begins. But that's not quite it for the Eye of Janthir. The Eye is still there. And now every 25% of Deimos' health. So when Deimos hits 75%, when Deimos hits 50%, and when Deimos hits 25% of his health left, when these thresholds occur, the Eye of Janthir is going to get mad, and he's going to choose someone again. In the middle of all the chaos of everything else that's going on, the Eye of Janthir is going to choose someone again. And once again, your team can decide who wants to go with him. You get teleported to the same place in the Elseworld again, but instead of seeing Deimos chained up there, you actually find a shadow version of Saul D'Alessio, another version of him. And this version of Saul is seeking to break out of this shadow world as well, and it's your job to kill him. He's kind of like one of these transitionary phase bosses, a bit like Sabbatha the Saboteur, if you guys have done that fight before. So you need to, in the fight, select a bunch of people to go up and try and kill this Shadow Saul. When the Shadow Saul gets to 50% health, he returns to the real world, and now you're fighting Deimos and Shadow Saul at the same time. Each of the 3 Shadow Sauls, the one at 75, 50, and 25, have different mechanics associated with them. So the first one you fight at 75% health, you teleport up, it's Saul the Thief. And so this is one aspect of his character in the lore. What this guy does is he's got very frequent, very easily broken break bars. This is a really cool idea, by the way, and something I wanted to see them do in raids, and I'm really happy that, even if it's in a very small way, we have had. I think they can push this a lot further. But this is like break bars coming very quickly, and you've got to keep them down. If one of his break bars goes through, Saul will steal all the boons of everyone around him, which kills your damage output, takes your quickness away, takes all your might generation, your fury for a little while. All of them will obviously pulse back as you put them back, but it gives them to him too, so now he has all of this stuff, and he has protection, and if you don't have any strip, then that's gonna be really irritating and properly slow you down. So make sure you get those break bars down. I think that's the easiest way to deal with Saul the Thief. Just make sure the break bars are down, and knock him out very quickly. Because of these very frequent break bars, and because Saul, the real Saul D'Alessio, can stun Deimos, I actually found on my Elementalist, my Glass Ellie, when we were originally running, I really enjoyed running a Sigil of Impact on my staff and running Tempest Defense, the Elementalist trait, air trait, which gives me 30% more damage to these people. It really helps you to burst him down, and if you're not going the Condi route, maybe that's worthwhile. Obviously, I'm not going to be the authority on that, but that was a pretty fun little way of dealing with that for my group. So that's the first one. That's Saul the Thief. The next one is Saul the Gambler. This guy's really interesting. As you fight Saul the Gambler, he splits himself himself into multiple different forms. And so there'll be 4 Saul the Gamblers, and it's your job to kill the right one. But which one is the real one? Oh, it's a gamble, guys. Well, it's not actually a gamble. You need to look at the staff that Saul is wearing. You remember Liadri, the concealing light from the Crown Pavilion, that solo fight? He's kind of got that effect on him. And if you look carefully at the weapons that they're wielding, the one who is wielding a white mantle staff, he's your guy, and you want to kill that one. The second you kill the correct one, you'll get to fight Shadow Saul the Gambler again, and when you get him to 50%, it will go back to the platform, and you're away. And then the final one at 25% is called Saul the Drunk. So Saul the Drunk definitely does have break bars. Now, I haven't seen too much of him because by the time we were getting consistently to this phase, my role was a bit different and I was never going to fight him. I'll explain that later. But I believe that it is a break bar. If you break it, he can't do this, but he teleports you away. He teleports everyone around like randomly, I think. And so, you know, this kind of drunken kind of idea. And you've got to deal with him. He is very, very threatening with that ability. You might think, oh, teleport's not so bad. It is bad because what you should understand is Saul the Thief, Saul the Gambler, and Saul the Drunk all continue their mechanics when they come to the real world. So you are fighting these guys at the same time as Deimos. So you need to keep breaking Saul the Thief's break bar so that he doesn't steal all your boons from you while you're trying to fight the main event. And Saul the Drunk, at the end of the fight, is really bad, teleporting people into random stuff because of Deimos' own attack. So you have to get these guys down. And there you go. So that's like the main theme and cool thing that's going on mechanically with the entire encounter. Let's move on. What about Deimos himself? I've left this for now. Let's actually talk about what the boss himself is doing. Deimos is he's a scary guy, but really there's 3 main things you've got to look out for. Number 1, it's a very consistent attack he does all the time. It's a big knockback. It's like a big ring that pulses around. When I was very first trying this, I was dodging this too early because you think you need to dodge when you see the orange, but it's actually a little bit later than that. This is a knockback where if you get hit by it, it's a lot like the Samurog fight. It will make your character spin off like a ballerina. This can totally knock you off the platform, so never position yourself with your back to the abyss behind you. Always make sure that if you're going to get hit by it, you're going to get knocked somewhere back closer into the middle of the platform instead of to the edge. But really you have to learn to dodge this, guys. You have to learn to dodge this. You can mitigate it in any way you like. You can distort it. You can so forth. If you are a Mesmer and you're going to be doing Signet distorts or whatever, do try to tell people, particularly if you're running people like Tempest that have lots of very long channels so that they don't have to interrupt their overloads and meteor showers to dodge this, because this happens all the time. This is the main thing. A little later in the fight, I think more towards the second half, he gets a new ability, and this is the number 1 thing that wiped us in the entire thing. This is, beyond all doubt, in my mind, the biggest thing for people to learn how to play around. This caused us hours of progression in this encounter, okay? He's got what we were calling Black Goop. It's an attack Deimos will use on a very specific person. I'll talk about who that specific person is in a second. But the Black Goop will drop a puddle of, you know, tar-looking stuff on the ground. This stuff does insane AoE damage to you. If you're in it, you're dead, basically. Even worse, so obviously you just want to avoid the Black Goop and have your toughness tank pull Deimos away from it slowly around the arena, and then you keep attacking. Simple, don't touch the Black Goop. But it's even more punishing than that. You can't, like, go in it and then hopefully get healed up a little bit, because the second any player steps 1 foot into the Black Goop, it expands. And then, because it's expanded, it's probably expanded into the space of another player. And then it's going to expand again, and again, and again, and again. And all of a sudden, basically the entire field will be covered in Black Goop. So, to avoid this, to maybe play around this, you can recover just about. The best way to play around this is to have your tank pull Deimos to the very edge of the arena. And then in this way, if a Black Goop does go disastrously wrong and fills up a huge chunk of the playable space, you've at least got places you can kite back to because he was already on the edge. If Deimos is dropping the Black Goops in the middle, that's a no-go. It's going to fill up the entire platform and you're screwed. So many of our wipes were because of this Black Goop. It is awful. It's not quite as scary as you might think. You can dodge through it. You can block through it as well, I believe. You can do these things and stop it from expanding, but the amount of times a player would just step in it because they're in autopilot, you know, and they're not thinking, or they're using some kind of skill that locks them in place, like a headbutt, or if you're a thief, like a weakening strike or a vault, or warriors using their greatsword threes and then accidentally going into it. These situations would come up again and again and again, and all of a sudden, because of one person slightly stepping out of space, the goop would fill up the platform and it's a wipe, and then you have to do the whole thing again. This is the most punishing part of the fight. Do not touch the black goop. It only comes towards the end of the fight as well, so people, you know, are in autopilot mode, potentially, if you've been grinding at it for hours and hours by the time this comes up, but that's what the black goop is. I said that he uses it on a very specific person. It's a really interesting mechanic here. I think it's new. This is actually the second furthest away. So we've had toughness tanking, or, you know, toughness aggros on certain things. We've had the closest player aggro certain things. We've had furthest away player aggro certain things in certain fights. But this one is the second furthest away player. And so this is very important to understand, because when the Eye of Janthir teleports everyone away into the Elseworld, when you return from the Elseworld, everyone's going to come down on one spot. And if a black goop is on that spot that everyone comes down from, that's a wipe. So you need to understand that it's the second furthest away player who's getting the black goop aggroed on them, so that that player never stands in the middle of the arena, which would drop the black goop in a place where people are going to get blown up by it. This is one of those situations where players will say, oh, there's too much RNG in raids, oh, it's too... But it's not really a gamble. It's not out of your control. You should understand who is going to be targeted by that black goop. Our tactic was to have at least one person stay down. We would have 3 people stay down when the Eye of Janthir chooses people at 75, 50, and 20. And this player would always get the black goop and make sure it was not in the center of the arena. So, yeah, dealing with black goop, keep it in mind. And so here's another big main mechanic. It's very, very frequent. I don't know the exact timing. Maybe every 45 seconds or so would be my guess. There's a big nuke that downstates everyone on the field if they do not stand in the center of the arena.
Stand in the war, quickly!
So not only do you have to go to the center of the arena when you're moving backwards and forwards from the Elseworld, but you're also going to get nuked if you get hit by this thing. It's just like in Fractals of the Mist, where Arx says, get into my shield and take cover, and everyone has to run under the shield. But Saul D'Alessio is conjuring a shield for you to help you survive a big nuke from Deimos, and this is consistently going off again and again and again. And so you can see now that if you're getting knockbacked because you're missing that dodge, or if you're dropping black goops in the wrong place, that's going to really make you struggle when everybody has to rotate, say, into the middle. There's a very interesting thing. Again, I think this is new, and I think this is wonderful about this big nuke. And that's the way you can mitigate it. You cannot evade the big nuke. So you can't use like a blurred frenzy. You can't use... There's so many evades built into so many skills. You cannot evade this. You cannot distort this. You cannot invuln this. All of these things will down you. But you can do one thing. This was actually something I suggested I wanted to see in raids way back when the Veil Guardian first came out, because I've always felt like there should be more incentive for this specific defensive mechanic, because it pushes classes like Guardian into a stronger place. That you can mitigate it with blocks.
Stand in the war, quickly! Quickly!
You can also mitigate it with Rebound, with Defiant Stance, with the Herald Heal. So these things that turn damage into healing. But blocks specifically are really huge. So you can block this. So you can decide as a group, do you all want to go into the middle every time? Or do you perhaps want to, pop an Aegis on people? Or pop, if you're a Chronomancer, a Well of Precognition, I think it is, which gives Pulse's Aegis out on everyone. So Aegis can be a bit risky, because if the Aegis gets popped by a different ability accidentally just before the nuke goes off, then that player will go downstate anyway. Guardian or Dragon Hunter specifically is quite nice, because their F3 will block everyone in that range. So that's quite nice, and it's not so, fiddly. But I think this is really cool. still, it can only be, like, block's the main thing, and I think that it's so weird that the game's got to the place where blocking needs this to be a bit more, you know, incentivized, but I think it's excellent. I'd really like to see raids do a lot more of that, because I felt like block should have a bit more of a place. Very, very, very cool stuff. Now, I just mentioned the idea that Aegis might be getting stripped, a little bit early. That's because there is an environmental mechanic that starts triggering. They're called tears. So the tears between the realities. They're like little cannons that spawn on the map, and they shoot these shards at people. Do considerable damage. They look like projectiles, but you can't stop them like with deflects or anything, as far as I understand. The only way to stop these tears, okay, and they'll keep building up and up and up and up, is players have to run over them. When you run over a tear, it goes away. You get a green skull above your head. That green skull just means you as an individual cannot claim another tear. So everyone needs to pay attention to them. Everyone needs to dip out of fighting Deimos every now and then to keep these turrets down. Because again, like, there's a big risk with those turrets. If you are about to have a big nuke go off and then you put blocks on everyone and then a turret shoots, oh dear, now it's stripped the Aegis, and, well, you get my point. So those are all the main things that you're doing while you're fighting Deimos. You can see how they all roll up, just like raids often do, when they're all there at once and you're fighting Shadow Saul. It can be a little bit ridiculous. So, where does the fight go from here? You've done very well. You're in the later phases very consistently. What else do you have to pay attention to? Well, remember how the fight started? With the spirits? Guess what makes a return towards the end of the fight? Yeah, the spirits return. So, greeds will start coming. Now, the greeds, if you remember at the start of the fight, these little spirits, greeds and prides, these were running into Saul to try and kill Saul D'Alessio. Not you. They never actually posed any risk to you. They return it later on in the fight, and that's still true. What they're going to do is they're making a beeline for Saul, who is fighting alongside you. And Saul is going to be taking damage. If Saul dies, it's over. So now you need to also be focusing not so much on the greeds, but the prides. You need to be keeping prides away. I would contribute at keeping prides away with some of my staff skills. But specifically, people, again, I mentioned condition damage. People are loving Condi Ranger these days. Even Condi Druids, right? Druids in general, any kind of Ranger class, you guys can drop Entangling Roots and stuff. And this is really, really helpful. Basically, what happens is if you just immobilize the hell out of a pride to stop it getting to Saul, then another one won't spawn. So sometimes it's better to just delay them and stop them from being able to move while you fight Deimos, so that you don't have to keep dealing with more prides that spawn. At least this was our interpretation of how it worked. So we just kept them purely immobed and killed the ones that were very close, of course, but otherwise that's another mechanic you then have to deal with. So, awesome! You've managed to nail all of this stuff. This incredible fight. You're doing really well. Nobody's getting hit by the blacks anymore. You've got the boss to 10%. Well, actually, 10%, in my opinion, the fight gets a lot easier. So again, I mentioned at the start of this video that the fight is very, very cool for the theming and the story. There's a lot of really cool lore and things that go on. Well, at 10%, the whole thing changes, sort of. We all teleport away. The Eye of Janthir gets pissed. It teleports us all into the Elseworld all at once. Deimos, who's been killed in the physical world now, he, well, presumably, he appears to us in this realm, and he is friggin' badass. He's this giant dude that clutches onto the side of the platform, and he's got a really epic design. The combat music changes, your adrenaline's going, and now you have to deal with the fight in here. Just for the last 10%, most mechanics remain that were present in the fight before, but the spirits that are moving into Saul no longer remain. That's not a thing. I think Saul does come with you. He does still get hit with Unnatural Signet and stuff. Deimos does still get hit with Unnatural Signet. And Deimos' abilities change. He's no longer using the knockback and stuff like that, but his abilities change. He'll start slamming the side of the platform. Now, one of them is, once again, like a blowout, and you can, again, fall off of the edge of the platform, but it's very well telegraphed. It's a very comfortable, very easy dodge. If people don't panic, which you will be panicking, but if you don't, and you can see in my footage, we panicked. We had a 1% wipe here. We had a 1% wipe on one of our runs. It's panic mostly that does people in on this. Just maintain your formations, try and kill him just like normal. Watch for that regular, kind of very easy tail there, and I think you can burn through him just fine. The key thing to remember in the last 10%, okay, is the blacks are still a thing. that goop will still be dropped down. Our 1% wipe was because a black got dropped down. We weren't expecting it. Someone ran into it. It filled the entire boards, and we couldn't actually recover from that situation. So the black goop remains a thing. Remember that in the last 10%. Burst him as hard as you can, and you should be fine. So there you go. That's the fight. That's Deimos in a nutshell. But wait, hold on. There is a mechanic I'm missing. Sorry, guys. And that's the mechanic that I was playing with. And I've got quite a lot to talk about. So this is where the footage has been kind of weird. Kind of crap, actually. I'm sorry about the footage on this. It wasn't too long before my role kind of changed from a classic kind of damagey guy. The build I was running, just like with a lot of this, was very standard. I wasn't even using like fresh air staff or anything. I changed my role. I decided to start kiting Flak. So this is the last mechanic. This is a really peculiar idea. So peculiar, for a while I was convinced, just like we'd missed something with Samurog, we might have missed something with this fight too. There is a very interesting role in the Deimos fight, and that's what you've been watching me doing. So Deimos has black goop, which he does on the second to furthest away person, but the furthest away person gets something else. They get Flak. This is just like Sabbatha the Saboteur, where she'll shoot flamethrower shots at the furthest away person that persist on the ground for a really long time. So these hands on the floor that you've been seeing, these hands do immense damage. If you have everyone on Deimos, Deimos is going to cast those on the players that are there, and everyone's going to get blown up by them. The hands do not despawn except under very specific circumstances. They stay there, and there will eventually be tons of them across this very, very, very small arena. So one person in your group is going to be the role of Flak, drawer. That was me. And what it is their job to do is to stand as far away from Deimos at all times and keep these hands away. Now, if Deimos is close to the hands, number one, people can get knocked back into them and die because of that. But number two, Deimos will actually eat them. And as he eats them, he gains stacks of extra damage, which makes the hands do even more damage and everything else do even more damage. It's really important that you keep these hands as far away. We played a lot of different methods of where to hold the hands versus where to hold the boss. Personally, in my opinion, I think you should hold them on the exact opposite side of the arena every time. Just hold them as far as away. Look at where your tank is. Your tank is going to be very slowly rotating around the perimeter of the field, probably, because they're going to have to avoid blacks every now and then. At the start of the fight, they won't, but later they will have to slowly rotate around. And as they slowly rotate, clockwise or counterclockwise, you want to make sure you keep the Flak away as well. So I started at like a circle squad marker, and then I was slowly moving with it. Remember I said that Saul D'Alessio drops banners? Well, he drops his banner on the furthest away player as well. So Deimos is trying to kill the furthest away player with the hands. Saul is trying to keep the furthest away player alive with the banners. So when you are the Flak person, you take immense damage. Very, 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 very high damage. And so you want to watch for where Saul drops his banners and stay within range of those. And you should be able to watch me doing that quite a lot in the footage here as well. There's a very profound difference. Saul's banner gives you like 10% of your max health every second. So if you build a high vitality character, you're laughing. You'll suddenly regen a lot. Having a lot of vitality on that Flak carrier is really, really, really cool, and a lot of classes can probably benefit from understanding that. I do believe that the Flak player can be pretty much anyone in the entire game, but it's a pretty profound role. So, what you need to understand about the way that this works is as he throws Flak on you, he's going to summon a pile of hands, and then another wherever you're stood, and then another wherever you're stood, and another 5 times, okay? He's going to summon hands where you are 5 times. Then he's going to stop for a second, and you can move around and you won't summon anymore. And then about, for a period of maybe 3 to 4 seconds, and then he's going to summon 5 more piles again. In that period where he's not touching you, he's trying to retarget. So if anyone's further away than you, then it will swap to them, and that's really bad, because if it swaps to them and then they run next to Deimos, then the hands are next to the group, Deimos is going to eat them, Deimos is going to do more damage. Really, really, really bad. You need to make sure you are the furthest person away at all times. But the fact that he pulses it 5 times, then stops, 5 times, then stops, 5 times, then stops, is very useful to you. See, what you're trying to do is keep as much of the arena safe as possible. Imagine this, your group has just hit a black and it's expanded across the platform, but they've managed to recover. They need as much space as possible that is free of Flak to come and retreat into. So you need to keep as little flak on the field as possible. So if you're just running around, charging around the board to you know, avoid the flak doing damage to you, you're going to paint 5 different spots with hands, and then 5 different spots, and you're going to fill up the arena really, really, really quickly. So in my opinion, what I learned to do was once the animation started on me, I would stand there and I'd let the hands hit me, and I'd let them hit me again and again and again until if possible, until all 5 piles are on that one exact hyper intense spot that's doing 5 stacks of damage at once, and then I step off of it. Because now what I've done is I've created just one small space on the arena that has got flak on it, as opposed to 5. I'm filling up the board 5 times slower than perhaps other flak runners might with different strategies. So you want a build that can sustain heavily through this stuff. You can use invulns and things if you want. I could have gone like I was doing this on an LE, so I could have done like a mist form, obsi flesh, fortify on earth shield style combo. I just never like worked out the rotations for it, but I think that could work. Sylvari can invuln with their invuln, maybe if they with take root, maybe if they think that that's something worthwhile. But this is your objective, is to keep as much of the board safe as possible. It's not just to survive and be as far away all the time. It's actually to like try and tessellate these little spots as perfectly as possible and make these super little hyper intense stacks. I've never seen anyone else run in flak. This is just what I ended up doing. Maybe people in the comments will end up having other really cool advice for this role. But it's really weird, guys, because basically I was playing my own game. Very few junctures was I actually interacting with the rest of my team. Now, I did this on a staff Ellie with like soothing power. It's incredibly potent. If you use your rotations well and perfectly, you can do incredible stuff on this set. And then later on in the fight, I can interact with the rest of the stuff. I can throw immobilizers out or chill fields out. I swear to God, I was on a 50% nomad, 50% magi set. I didn't go full nomads because I didn't want to take toughness tank from my chronomancer, or my backup chronomancer in case the first one died. So I was on a really weird set, and on my staff I had a sigil of chilling, but I had it there because I knew that there was no real other appropriate sigil for me, and I knew it would help keep the prides away. Weirdest stuff. I could just imagine people using these gear check programs and being like, what the hell is this guy running? It's the most absurd gift. I love that it's incentivizing some weird stuff. I have no doubt, by the way, you can do this even on zealots and stuff, and then you can contribute more in some other areas. I think people have been running druids to kite flak, which is probably a really good idea. You can set the pet to attack. You can drop spirits if you're really smart, closer towards your fight, so that you can buff your team, so you can buff them, and then you can still run entangling roots, and you can stop prides even better than, say, an Ellie can. But I'm sure that there are opportunities and things that most characters can pull, most classes can actually pull. Now, here's one thing that you must understand, one final thing about flak that's very cool and that you have to pay attention to. Remember what I said about Deimos' attacks. Deimos has a global nuke that hits everyone on the platform. Oh yeah. So this is pretty bad. There's lots of different ways of dealing with this. When you have flak, that means potentially you have to go into the middle of the platform so that you don't die, and then you drag flak in there. And then when people teleport back from the Elseworld, they're in flak. And then, you know, maybe someone else accidentally has been the furthest away for a brief moment, and then they've got flak and they're dragging it, and it's just weird. You can maybe blink in, or again, if you're a druid, you can use your staff 3 to quickly dip in. My advice, though, is look into blocks. So I actually was on an Ellie. I was rotating Arcane Shield, and I was rotating Rebound, and I never, this was the advantage I felt I had, I never had to go into the middle of the arena for any of those nukes. What I would do is I'd listen when Saul says, everybody get in the middle. I would ignore Saul, and I would pop Arcane Shield, and then Arcane Shield would block one of the nukes. Make sure you're not standing in flak to waste your blocks early. That would block one of them, and then on the other one, I would rebound myself, and then rebound would push my health up, and a druid would dip in and quickly top me up maybe for a second, and then we'd head on our own ways, and we'd continue doing whatever roles we were doing. And this way, I never had to leave. And this incentivized a lot of really cool stuff. Remember I mentioned Earth Shield a second ago? Earth Shield has an amazing quality of life block on it, as well as an invuln on it. So So I was very much interested in Earth Shield, but it doesn't quite work because the block gets wasted if you're standing in the wrong place. I wish it worked like a Ranger Greatsword 4, for example, where it will just keep channeling. Unfortunately, it doesn't, and they almost had me running Earth Shield in a raid, which I would have blown my mind, but the implementation of the skill is just slightly off. So things like there's these blocks, and I mean, I think even Rev, right? Like a Ventari Rev or something could probably sustain incredibly well out there and even move the tablet around as and when needed, pop a Staff 3 to block and then use their Herald Heal to tank another one, and you should be perfectly fine, honestly. There is a slight consequence of blocking instead of going into the middle. You will get a debuff on you that drains your health, and so your toughness tank is probably not going to go in the middle, and you are probably not going to go in the middle, and both of these characters will need extra healing to sustain through that. But yeah, that's the flak mechanic. Really, really, really weird. I basically just wasn't a part of the fight, guys. And the final 10%, flak is still there, so I was at the very back. That's why it looks like a lot of my plays very weird. I mean, I've got to the end very, very few times, obviously, already. But, and maybe there's better stuff I could be doing. But that's our role, to keep the flak away. And that's the fight there. So, a second ago, I mentioned that the hands will never go away, except under very specific circumstances. So, with Sabbath of the Saboteur, her flamethrower shots, they will eventually despawn. This version is not quite that simple. See, the only time that these will ever go away is when players drag Shadow Saul back from the Elseworld. So there are only 3 times ever in these fights that you can actually get this stuff to go away. One occasion is at 75% health when everybody returns, one is at 50, and one is at 25. So this, above anything else, is the reason why I feel groups need to keep some high damage and actually kill the boss in a reasonable amount of time. The enraged timer truly isn't much of a mechanic, but if you're taking ages to kill Deimos, thus not getting into the Shadow World to get Shadow Saul back very quickly, then the hands don't go away and the arena will fill up an awful lot. So basically what happens is when everyone comes back, Deimos will try to eat all of the hands on the board and he'll drag them all towards him. And so this can be a serious threat to everybody coming back because there's going to be tons of hands moving across the field and potentially a black to avoid and potentially a one-shot happening. So you got to be really careful, like double dodge when you come back from the Shadow World. But the good part of this is if you've been kiting the flak far enough away, when Deimos tries to pull it all into him to eat them, they won't reach him in time before they go away and he won't get any stacks, the board will be cleared, and you get to fight nice and fresh, and you get all of your space back. But the longer the fight goes on, the more pressure people are under, the less damage they do, the longer that it takes for people to get to the next threshold, the more hands appear, and it snowballs out of control in that juicy way that you've probably become accustomed to in raids. And that's why it's very important you as the flacker take up as little space as possible. I wouldn't be surprised if eventually we see some really cool techniques where people take up basically no space by double dodging or triple dodging or something into the same areas and creating like 10 stacks on the same spot. That would be ridiculous. I just haven't seen anyone risk or find a strategy like that just yet. I was doing my best. So our tactic in general was to run a lot of Condi, to make sure we knew who the toughness tanks were, obviously dodge the important stuff, stay out of the blacks, but we had 3 different people assigned. We had a toughness tank assigned, we had me assigned on flak on the far away. So the tank and the flacker stay down when everybody goes up to fight Shadow Saul. If everybody goes up to fight Shadow Saul, then the flak gets on the real Saul and the real Saul dies and you just wipe. So the tank stays down, the flacker stays down to keep that going. And also we had a third person stay down, that was a druid. This druid got blacks, remember, second furthest away, flaks and blacks. And the blacks, this druid would then keep the blacks in safe places, and towards the end also keep prides and so forth away too. And that was the fight. That was how we beat it. That was hopefully, I hope, a good explanation. Really interesting stuff. Really peculiar mechanics that the devs have been putting out there. And stuff that I've been very, very happy to see. I'm really curious to see how, once this is super well optimized, people end up dealing with things. The challenge mode where you don't have Saul and he won't be given the flacker banners and stuff could all be very, very, very awesome. Loved the fight. It was definitely the hardest of them. It was probably the best of them, though. And I think that's really awesome. Can't wait to assess maybe some of the challenge modes of the other bosses. But there you go, guys. That is this wing. I had some real progression there, so I'm really happy to show you guys what I learned from it and how I experienced it. Hopefully you managed to live a little bit vicariously here. Let me know what you think. Give any tips to myself or others in the comments. I think that would be really awesome. People did that on some of these other little raid videos I did before. And until next time, everyone, have a wonderful evening. I'll see you very shortly. Thanks for watching.
Invigorating.